Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Is that better? Okay. Thank you all for coming out tonight to this, I guess, the concluding event for One City, One Book. I wanted to start off, as I hinted or told Gus earlier, by talking about the beginning of the book, essentially the origins of the book. And I think from there we'll go on to other things tonight, but particularly that, because now correct me if I'm wrong, but I asked you earlier when you had started the book, and you said you were around 42 when you started writing it, I guess. And I found that very interesting because it's essentially an autobiographical novel, and most autobiographical novels that you read are usually written by people in their 20s near that time, especially if you're writing about their youth. It's usually not that big of a lapse of time. So I wanted to start off by asking you, why at 42 did you feel the need to revisit your childhood?
Do you see that picture behind us? That's a very, very slow kid. He may look, okay, but in fact, he's legally blind. He doesn't understand English. He can't fight, and he's in a fighting neighborhood. So I was really slow, Oscar.
Yeah.
And
that's why it took 20 odd years.
Exactly. But if you really follow the popcorn trail, it has two remarkable pieces to it, I think. One is early library reading and great English teachers. And the other was our 7-year-old daughter, who was the same age that I was when my American Odyssey began. And when she asked us, we had just received photos of our long-lost, disconnected family members in China, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Xi'an. And we were hanging these pictures up, and these were cousins. These are the children of my father's older brother. And we believed they had perished during the Cultural Revolution, in fact, if not earlier. And here they were, alive, writing to us in America and sending pictures. And Jenna said, I have 3 grandparents, and I'm missing a granny. Where is she? And I said, she died a long time ago. And Jen asked a very strange question for her, who she's never known a mean mother. And she said, was that your mommy, and was she nice? And I said, yeah, that was my mommy. And I have a hard truth to tell you, and that is she was never very proud of me, and we never got along very well. And Diane, my bride, said, Gus, Jen is asking about your real mother, not your stepmother. And I said, my real mother. I said, I don't remember anything about her. I was 5 when she passed away. And Jenna's eyes grew really huge because she thought, this is my daddy. He can reach the tall shelves. He can do 2nd grade arithmetic. He knows every word in the vocabulary test. And he knows colors, So this is he's a genius. How would he not know his own mommy? And it was that question which drove me to interview my 3 older sisters who had escaped with our mother from China during the war, largely on foot, 4 females alone, to interview them and write down a journal. And that journal became China Boy.
How long did it take to interview them? And did you interview other people besides your sisters?
No, only them. We really had been disconnected from other members of the family and from our mother's friends. And that's because of the evil stepmother who had really sealed off her life. It was like my mommy died twice, once corporeally and the second spiritually in memory, and that was a murder. The second one was a murder. But it was just my 3 older sisters. I knew my father would not talk about his first wife. Mm-hmm. He would not talk about China or the past. So it was just the 3 of them. That took really a weekend. We sat down, the 4 of us, and I used to be a DA. I interviewed them as if I were preparing for a homicide trial. See, what a DA has to do in those cases is you have to bring the deceased to life, because the defendant is going to sit there in a suit, not looking at all like the night in which he killed. and the deceased will come into the courtroom as autopsy photos from CSI. So we have to humanize the victim so she's present.
You have to construct a narrative.
Exactly. What time did she get up in the morning? What sort of friends did she have? What kind of books did she read? And so forth. What were her values? So that's what I asked my 3 older sisters, and the result was, after a long weekend, enough material to write the first fourth of China Boy.
Now, had you taken any sort of writing classes, anything along those lines when you started this?
Nothing. When the thing got written, and the thing got written, this journal, in 3 months. So it was clearly not. I was not acting on my own because I'm not that smart. So I got help. But in any event, we then had to find a literary agent. How many of you know literary agents? Yeah. We didn't know any, and we had to find a literary agent, and the literary agent had to find a publisher, right, and not go to the phone book. Right. So the literary agent ended up with Jane Distel, one of the best in the business, and she has a voice like Vito Corleone. So she says, "Gus, yes, this is Jane Distel. I have some questions for you, if I may." And I said, "Yeah, of course." He said, "What writing program did you come out of?" I said, "I didn't. I was never been in no writing program." "Well, you majored in creative writing in English." "No, I went to an engineering school." "Well, you've gone to writers' conferences, and you're in a writing group." I said, "No," and I'm thinking, this is all a big mistake. I'm really sorry I bothered you. Forget it. It was a bad idea. Anyway, no background.
But you must have read.
Except for the library. Coming to the main library as a kid, later Parkside Branch as a teenager, reading voraciously. And again, as I said, I had a phenomenal senior composition teacher, Mrs. Marshall, and my first freshman English instructor, prof at West Point, Captain Polonik. They were gifted teachers, and they really brought whatever small writing interest I had to life. Although I still didn't see myself as being capable of writing a book.
While you were writing it, let me back up. After you finished the book, did you notice any influences of anyone you read in the book? Were you picking up unconsciously on any sort of writers? I mean, in terms of style and in terms of the way you were writing. The reason I bring it up is because the way you use dialect. Yeah. You have about 5 or 6 different dialects going at once, and I wanted to find out, like, how did you go around? How'd you go about, trying to get those sounds on the page the way you did? It's not unlike Mark Twain, sort of with Huckleberry Finn and that sort of thing.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Twain, because as I was recounting conversations between Toussaint, and Toussaint's a real person, Kim got to see Toussaint at Litquake a couple of weeks ago. Toussaint, the razor-sharp street fighter who scraped me off the sidewalk on McAllister Street and tried to teach me how to be a successful black male youth. Here's this dialogue between Toussaint and me, and I have not thought about what Toussaint and I had to say for decades when I'm writing this. And I'm very emotional because I'm realizing that he and his mother and the boxing faculty at the YMCA had really saved my life. And it's all coming back to me for my daughter. And I have this flash of Huck and Big Jim, except in that conversation, Huck is the one who knows just a little bit more about French than Big Jim does. And in every conversation with Toussaint, I know nothing, and Toussaint knows everything. But I did think of Twain. And then I put it very Chinese conscience, which is, let me get this straight. You're an idiot in the English language, and you're now writing this dialogue from childhood, and you're thinking of Mark Twain, right? So I got rid of that thought very quickly. It seemed inappropriate.
Oh, it's all right. That's completely
You're very
fine.
kind.
Well, it's all right. It's all right. Well, and so, given that Tucson's a real person, Coach Tony is a real person, true? Your sisters, even on
They're real people.
You're right. You're Kai, I'm assuming, yes?
Yes.
So why write it as a novel and not as a memoir?
Do the words Confucius mean anything to you? So there's this notion that if you're in a Confucian family and you write about your parents, you're dead. Not only that, you've done something horrible to all the beforeborns. And going way back, I mean, eons, millennia. And you're the one, you're the Chinese-American idiot who broke this chain of respect. So I thought, just because my father was very smart, that if I changed the names, he wouldn't get it. I went so far, I mean, here I am, at the time I wrote this, I was the trainer for California's prosecutors. And I was not naive about life. I mean, really, I'd grown up in the underbelly and I'd prosecuted some very, very difficult people. And there were no mysteries left in life, but I thought, if I wrote the book under Augustus Lee, my formal name, Dad would never figure it out. Not smart. But anyway, I changed the names. I took my father out of the story. Mm-hmm. He was really not a good father and not a good husband. Excuse me. And thinking that would offend him far less than if I revealed him in reality. Even if I only represented half of what he was, he would be humiliated in Chinatown, in San Francisco, at work. And Confucian or not, there's no story worth that.
Right.
Plus, it wasn't going to get published, but I didn't want our children to know how genuinely scary their grandfather was. I mean, he was pretty scary to them already, but if they knew that he was worse than that, that wasn't information they needed at their tender ages. So I had lots of reasons besides fear to change the name and just, write it as a novel.
Would you, if you had it to write over again, would you change that? Would you go about it a different way? You still would do it that way?
No, there's my father and I at that time did not have a good relationship, but there was nothing that he had done in his life that merited his son attacking him in public.
And you were conscientious. You felt it would. I mean, you weren't. If you would have never intended to have been attacked, though, right? I mean, in terms of what you're writing it, or you would have just been, this is what happened.
But revealing it would have had the effect. It's sort of like I remember. I really was blind. I had 20 over 800 and once 20 over 900 vision. So and I didn't get glasses till I was 9, so I didn't know I wasn't stupid. I just thought the world was a very confusing place and didn't understand until 9 that there's a world out there. But in the boxing ring, there's no room for glasses, so I went back to being blind even after I had them. And I remember I was boxing this kid named Connie, and we were just shadow boxing. We weren't supposed to make contact. And but I misjudged the distance, and I really clocked him. And, really dumb. So I was shadow boxing. I felt contact, and then Connie wasn't there anymore. It's like, where'd Connie go? And that's what it would have been like to tell the truth in China Boy in 1991 when the book was published about my father. Maybe I wouldn't have intended to clock him, but I would hit him right in his face.
Sure. Were you reading the novel? What I was surprised by more than anything else, well, not surprised so much as just frankly delighted, was the way you portrayed 50 San Francisco in two aspects. And if you want to comment on this, that'd be great. One is, the 50s generally have been thought of as being some sort of golden age, where everybody got along, kids were safe, you could put them on the street, it was beautiful, gardenias all over the inner city. It was a great place. And it's little better than Deadwood, the way you write about it. I mean, there's a lot of hurt and there's a lot of discontent, there's a lot of poverty going on. That's number one. Number two, what was also very surprising was to see actually how multicultural San Francisco already is. at that point. This is, it's already a place, at least, in your neighborhood, where you have people of different ethnicities who connect with each other and do so, and frankly, in a very open way. If you, when you were writing the novel, did it surprise you to remember that that's actually the way things were? Had you ever at any point yourself like distorted and thought, then like just for example, so when you're writing about Big Willie beating the tar out of Kai and going, oh my God, we were living basically in a hellhole,
First on the 50s, what a great question. I hate questions that require me to think, and this one definitely doesn't. But 50s were both. It was an idyllic time because I remember very clearly from the men in the neighborhood who began to drift away as the 50s deepened. And these are African American men who were all World War II veterans, and what it meant to them to not be in war anymore. I remember African American families talking about not being in the Jim Crow South anymore, not living under really immoral, punishing, degrading segregation. I mean, lethal segregation. So San Francisco was haven from Jim Crow South. It was haven from being in the ETO and the Pacific Theater of Operations, where 500,000 Americans died. So that was real. It was a time when politeness and civility had greater sway in popular culture than now. People had the same dislikes and the same prejudices and the same bigotry. I think that is invested in much of human nature. But there were only very limited circumstances in which that could be voiced. I'm not saying that was better, but it was different. On the other hand, poverty of spirit and poverty of person are human conditions. And we only think that they don't exist because we're not looking at it. It's there now. It's in the city now. In many ways, it's more pronounced than it was when I was a kid growing up in the 50s. And it's certainly in the world. So I think it's a continuous reality. I was in a school today where I saw two young men who could have been, except for the dramatic age difference, buddies of mine, running buddies from the Panhandle, both kids of color, and with so much hurt and disregard and fear about their lives inside them that they had to punch each other out. And they spread fear to others so that adults who were watching this did not intervene. The violence was paralyzing. Now that could have been Roosevelt Junior High. Mm-hmm. That could have been Anza Elementary, Fremont Elementary in the Panhandle where I went to school.
Yeah, that plays out in the novel. You can see that with the bullies, that it's a cycle of violence or a cycle of abuse, where where the father beats on him, he goes out and he beats on the weaker guy, and so forth and so on.
We live as we learn.
And did you at any point realize while writing this novel, you're writing a great sports book, by the way? Because it has some of the best descriptions about boxing. I'm a boxing fan. And I was really delighted to see so much attention brought to the detail of what goes into create a boxer. Could you comment more on that? I mean, do you still box? Or you still follow the sport? Anything like that?
Only remotely. I really did that sport. When I left San Francisco at the age of 17 to go to West Point, I went down to the Central Y on 220 Golden Gate in Leavenworth, and I said goodbye to Tony. Tony was really my father. And what I'll never forget is that he apologized when I was saying goodbye. What I wanted him to say is, you know what, kid, you came in here, you were a wreck. You know, you looked like a toothpick in a tutu. You looked like a shrimp on a hook. You turned sideways and you disappeared. You know, you look like you could be a man now someday. And you know, the YMCA is real proud of you. Now, you go to West Point, you do a good job, and you think of me every now and again. And, you know, if you find something like St. Boniface, light a candle for me. That's what I expect him to say. Instead, he says, you know, I'm really sorry that you ended up boxing 10 years from me, because I know the only reason you did it was me, that you don't have the heart of a fighter. You got the heart of a peacemaker. And he sort of said it like it was a curse, but, you know, for Pete's sake. And that's really true. If Tony had taught painting, who knows, you know? But because boxing was actually the
great
tonic.
oil colors that you're getting thrashed later.
But I needed boxing, Oscar. I really did, because I was a physical coward, and I lived on hard streets. So I needed that in order to grow, and I needed to learn. And if there's a lesson to boxing and to China Boy for youth, I think it's this: that we all have opportunities to face our fears. And we live in a culture of fear. But if we can face that fear, whatever it is that has hounded us or hounds us, then we have a real opportunity to be our best selves. And we make lots of reasons to run away from it, but they're not good reasons. And that's what Tony taught me. So I admire boxing. I do watch it. We have a body bag that hangs in our backyard.
You don't flick a K-bar at it or anything.
No,
like that.
no.
You didn't pick that up. That you didn't pick up. The flying
Exactly.
kicks and other.
Well, you don't want to show that to your kids. You know, a K-bar is a Marine Corps bayonet knife, which Pinoy learned to throw and as a weapon. But I still hit the bag just for exercise. And our son, Eric, who's now 20, is an amazing martial artist. And he makes the bag sing the way Tony and Bobby and Pinoy used to make that.
What's interesting, I mean, part of the point, though, of learning boxing or anything like that, at least what I took away from it, is that when you're in control, when you know what you're doing, you know, you're thinking. And when you're thinking, it's funny, it's like the better prepared you are, the less chance you're probably going to get in a fight. You know, it's sort of paradoxical, which I thought, which is one of the things, like, for example, Coach Lewis and the novel sort of embodies this hulking man who could, you know, thrash anybody, but that's not what he's about. In fact, seems to be a very calm, very peaceful, thoughtful person.
Exactly.
You know, and he turns into like a thinking man's game, frankly, that it's not just swinging your fist. It's not just beating someone up. It's even the idea of respecting the opponent, this sort of thing, you know, telling them thank you for the fight, you know, that sort of thing. Preparing, I guess, for a struggle, which life is going to be.
And it's really, I mean, what I loved about the Y, and I continue to love about the Y, is that it taught principles. And yeah, life is a struggle, and life's going to be a challenge, and there'll be real hard days, maybe even hard years. If you're unlucky, hard decades, but it all won't be hard. And that if you prepare yourself, and they were really training us to be men. I mean, up front, in your face, we are training you to be men, not males. Right. But to be men.
And that's, you know, and that's sort of, it took me aback, because you realize your class were a bunch of like 7-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds. Usually this is the sort of thing you address to people when they're 15, 14, say, now it's time to be a man. And these guys are starting right off the bat.
Boxing in San Francisco in the 1950s was a culture. There were, in this city alone, you know, it's a much smaller city back then, there were easily 50,000 guys that knew how to box. Because that's what you learned in the YMCAs. That's what you learned in the police athletic leagues. That's what you did in the Army. And everyone went in the Army. I mean, all men did who, you know, were qualified. So it was part of the culture. It was as common to know, in my opinion, for men in the 1950s to know how to box. I mean, not to master it, but to know how to box, as there are men today who know how to operate a cell phone. That's as common as it was.
It was a given.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you something that's scary.
Okay.
Did you really get the beat down like that, like at the end of the novel? Was that, I mean, were you just seriously ripped apart?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my.
Well, in fact, worse. So here are some things that are not true in the book.
Okay.
Number one, the chapter Wood, where Kai Ting meets with the Tucson, the chess club in Chinatown. That never happened. I walked in on them and was chased out.
So you mean they didn't like getting little kids drunk?
Yeah,
that never
that's
happened.
right.
All right.
And there was S.Y. Shen, my uncle, who's Uncle Shim in the book, did play chess and did say good things about the chess association to me, but I never, that whole evening never occurred. That was the suggestion of Gary Luke, a tremendous editor at Penguin. Number two, Kai Ting takes about 2.5 years, is my guess, in the book. Why am I guessing? I wrote it, but that's my sense. About 2.5 years from first lesson with Tony until he can beat Big Willie Mack. It was 4 years. But there were so many years of more beatings that Diane said, gosh, this is too much. Too much of a good thing. Take him out. So I compressed the time. And a Washington Post book editor who is African American caught that in a heartbeat. He said, it was a fine book, but the only problem I have is how does a 9-year-old kid, because I think he's about 9 or 10 at this point, how does he fight that well? Well, the fact is he doesn't. The fact is he's 11 going on 12 when it really happens.
And how old was Big Willie by this point?
28. You mean chronologically or by body size? Body size, 28. Chronologically, no one really knew how old he was, but my guess is he was 14.
Yeah, and that's the other, getting back to that again about the cycle of abuse and the sort of stuff you touch upon, is you really, you make him out to be such a tragic figure. In the end, he doesn't seem to have anything. The poor guy really, in fact, and that was one of the things again that caught my attention in the novel was how even though when the coaches are getting ready for this big showdown, the emphasis is still being placed that he's not evil.
That's right.
Yeah, he's just basically confused, and he's going to keep hurting you until you defend yourself. But he's not evil.
That's right.
Now, do you believe that there's no such that people, for the most part, people who hurt other people, who even sometimes kill other people, are not evil so much as maybe they're just messed up?
No, I believe in evil.
Yeah.
I've seen evil. It's real. I didn't think Big Willie was evil. He was a kid. But you get to your late teens, get into your 20s, and after that, it's evil. To me, there's absolutely no doubt. It doesn't mean, I don't think, that we should change in response to facing evil. I think in each case, whether we're facing someone who's troubled and recoverable, or we're facing someone who's evil and will not change, we are still. This is YMCA training. This is also out of, Zion AME Church. I was in 2 African American churches as a child, and they really helped form me. And it is that sort of render to no one evil for evil. And in my worst fights, I really tried not to be evil. I really tried to be principled about what I was doing. The fact that it was desperate was not cause to change principles.
Okay. Let me ask you this. So what's become of all the people in the novel? Like, for example, Tucson. You said you met up with him again. So now what's going on with Tucson?
So what would you guess Tucson is doing? This kid who is a savior of other children, beginning at the age of 7. What do you think he is now? Preacher, minister, teacher, social worker. You know, he's all of those things, and he does it in the guise of being a family practice medical doctor.
Wow.
For Kaiser Permanente, Fresno. So there were 2 of us that I know of, 2 males who came out of the Panhandle in that generation who were not drafted to go to Vietnam. 2 of us. One, because I had enlisted, and second, Tucson, who got a 2S student deferment to go to UCSF and then UCSF Medical School. Think of how many African American guys had that opportunity in the 60s. I know of one. And the irony is, when we got together, when Tucson, Diane, this is a beautiful story, but there's no time to tell it. How Diane found, is time?
Yeah, sure.
So Diane comes down to the study while I'm writing the journal for our daughter, Jenna, and I'm crying. And she knows I don't cry very well, so this is pretty bad. And she's worried, what's wrong? And I said, choked up, I said, I just remembered that I was a very at-risk kid and that I almost didn't make it as a kid, but that I was rescued. And the rescuer that I'm thinking of right now was my first friend and his mother. And he was my first best friend, too. And there's so much that he put into me, and I never thanked him. I just accepted it. And I remember when I tried to be black, and I remembered when after that, I tried to be white. And when I tried to be white, it no longer served me to be a black would-be street fighter. That was really scary behavior. So I dropped it. And I remember telling myself I was never poor, I was never hungry, and I was never black. And in that self-telling, in my cowardice, my moral cowardice, my desire to be accepted in the next neighborhood, that I had forgotten Tucson. His name's Tucson, Diane, and he saved my life. And I got to find him. I don't know where he is. And because I'd been in the military and I'd been in law enforcement, I was able to look him up in military records and FBI records, every government record that exists, and he didn't exist. He hadn't made it to the age of 18 because he came up with nothing. And Diane said, you know, I don't believe that. I used a scientific empirical approach. I put in Tucson, Maceo Street. I put in his birth date. Pinpoint, he didn't exist. So he had died. A lot of kids in the neighborhood died. So he had died because I left there when still in junior high. Diane said, I'm going to find him. And I remember being angry. It's like, how can I mourn Tucson's passing if you keep this silly idea alive that he's around? So she's teaching at Merritt Hospital in Oakland. And she says, it's very important for us, she's a nurse, very important for us to tell the stories of our patients. That's how we tell moral truths. It's through our patients' stories. My husband learned that because he just wrote a book about his childhood in which he remembered his relationships with his best friend, Toussaint. That was her search, her formal search. His good friend, Toussaint, and how important Toussaint was to him, and that, in fact, it was part of his survival. After the talk, people come up to talk to her. She's amazing. So big crowd. But anyway, afterwards, one woman remains, and she's a nurse, and her name is Rose Mew. And Rose says, did you say the name Toussaint? And Diane says, yes, I did. Do you know someone named Toussaint? She's like, I surely do. I work with him. Where do you work? Kaiser Permanente, Fresno. So, my gosh, well, what's your Toussaint's last name? She says, Street, which is my Toussaint's name. And Diane screams. There are people picking up plates, in the back, and they drop them. And she says, do you know if would he be, like in his 40s? Oh, yeah, I think that's about right. Do you know if he came from, any way of talking to him? She says, sure. It's before cell phones. Went over to payphone, says, this is Rose Mew. This is an emergency. I need Dr. Street. Dr. Street. This is Rose Mew. I'm up at Merritt, and I want you to talk to this here lady. All right, would you do that? Because I think we're in the middle of a miracle. So she passes the phone over, and she gives it to Diane, and she says, this is not the first time this has happened to me. Diane says, is your name Tucson Street? Yes. Did you grow up in San Francisco? Yes. Who is this? Did you grow up in the Panhandle? Yes. Do you remember a little Chinese boy named Gus Lee? It's a long pause. And the voice says, of course I do. He was my best friend.
Very good.
When Tucson and I got together that weekend, yeah, Diane. Oh, and she says, the rest of this conversation is, I cannot believe I am so delighted to meet you by phone, Tucson. My name is Diane, and I'm Gus's wife. And we have 2 precious children together. And he will be so happy to know that you're around. We thought you were not in the world. And he said, it's the strangest thing. But about 2 years ago, I started having these dreams about Gus. And, there are a lot of Asian medical staff down here in Fresno, and they started wondering why this guy was coming up to him saying, do you know Gus Lee? Have you ever heard of a Chinese guy named Gus Lee? And just the other day, finally had this Asian doctor turn to me and say, Tucson, I look, you're the head of our department, and I admire you and everything. Why are you singling me out for all this attention for lunch and everything? And he said, well, you kind of remind me of a friend I had. And he says, it started 2 years ago. And 2 years ago was when I started writing the journal and started crying about Tucson in my study. So when we got together, I hugged him in the street. I hugged him in his car. We could never hug in the 50s, but I was hugging him like, it was going out of style. And he gets out of the car, I hug him, we're hugging on the stairs and everything. And his kids and my kids are laughing, and we're pretty entertaining to them. And we get inside the house. There's a Burlingame, and I said, Tucson. I looked him in the eyes and I said, I never got to thank you for saving my life. So, Tuz, thank you, man, for giving me my life. And he looked at me, and it was the weirdest thing. He just looked at me, and he made this face like, and then he said, what you talking about? No, now what you is like, that's not good. What are you talking about? Okay, but what you is like, what you talking about? And it was like, are there two, because this looked like Tucson. Just had this beautiful smile, this incredible smile. And he had that smile, and when we were as middle-aged men, balding and everything, and we're saying hello to each other. But that look and that, what you talking about? I mean, if Tucson didn't get it, that he saved my life, then either I'm crazy or this is not Tucson. And I didn't think I was crazy. So I said, what you talking about? I said, what do you mean, what are you talking about? And you taught me how to laugh, how to walk, how to smile, you tried to teach me how to fight. You taught me how to play round ball. You taught me how to hit a baseball. You tried to teach me how to hit a curve. You really taught me how to talk back when I had to talk back and be silent when I had to be silent. You taught me how to be an American kid, a street kid. Like, none of this makes sense. And he's kind of looking at me, well, there's a little bit of that. I said, a little bit of that. He says, I never got to thank you. Okay, at this point, I'm thinking, yeah, every time we crossed the Haight, went through the Panhandle to the Haight, we call it the Haight. I thought it was Hate, the Haight. There are some hard boys over there. But we go over to the hate, and, we're Tucson. People look at Tucson and say, yeah, I'm going to tussle with him. I don't think so. But then what's that China boy doing with that kid? Hey, Blood, what are you doing with that China boy? And then Tucson would be in trouble that he'd never get without me. So it's like, thank you. Yes, Gus, thank you for all those fights I got into because of you. Those names I got called because of you, ripped up clothes, it's like, yeah, you're welcome to, don't mention it, But he said, no, do you remember that first day in Mrs. Halloran's class, second grade? And I said, nope. I'm the one who wrote the book about this, nope. And he said, well, there was a trash can fire, and he named a kid, and I don't remember his name, but he was erasing and Ms. Halloran had written very carefully her name and the class, and, second grade, very beautiful penmanship. Remember that? I'm sure it's still being done. But anyway, it was being erased because one kid had another kid in a headlock and was erasing the whole board with his head. Other kids were punching each other out. Someone had taken a trash can from another classroom and thrown it through the window, breaking it. So there was glass all over the place. And our trash can was on fire. Someone had torched it.
Second grade?
Second grade. First day of second grade. And the teacher, where was, he says to me, where was the teacher? And I said, Tucson, I didn't have classes those days. I have no idea where she was. When she was teaching, I didn't know where she was. And he said, dang, you don't remember anything. It was just like being back in the hood again. And he said, she was holding on to you. I said, you're kidding. No. She says, you were the only kid in his seat, and you had your knees together and your hands folded on top of your knees, and you had your head down. And she was holding on to you with both hands. Everything else was in turmoil. And I remember what Mama said to me, which is, you get the teacher to be on your side. You respect that teacher like you respect me. And so I said, okay, that's cool. So I sat down behind you, put my knees together, folded my hands, put my head down. Before long, she was holding on to me too. He says, why do you think I went to Lowell, the academic high school? Why do you think I got into college from the Panhandle and became a doctor? Because you showed what a student does. I'm going, you know how stupid I was back in those days? I had no idea what was going on. They were speaking in English. So here was my great Tucson. Thank you so much. And he would have none of it because he's Tucson. Instead, he made up this, he's a genius, okay? So he makes up this fabricated thing about how I put my hands together on top of my knees and it got him into medical school.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I think at this point I'm going to turn over to, I guess, brief questions. I think we have a little bit of time for questions from the audience. So Rosie, lady over there, will be, raise your hand if you want to ask Gus anything, and she'll come by with the microphone.
I grew up in San Francisco as well and wondered how you ended up in the Haight when most people lived in Chinatown and North Beach, that area.
Yeah, what were we thinking, right? It came about because my father's employer, and they were kinsmen in Shanghai, in China. So they came to the United States at the same time, owned an apartment building in the Panhandle. And because I had early TB, it was recommended that I not live in Chinatown. So that apartment, the upper flat of this apartment building, 2085 Golden Gate, was given free to my father and my mother and my sisters and I to live in. So that's how we ended up there. It was because of my health condition or lack of health.
Oh, that was great for your health, apparently. Yeah. Just the right move.
Hey, I learned how to breathe real deeply, running for my life.
It's good to let blood out to cool down that fever.
That's right.
Another question from the audience.
I guess, how have your kids reacted to the book?
It's funny. I put it into three stages. Number one is at 7 and 5, they were too young to read it. and I had put in the salty language of the street, so I didn't want them reading it. So I would tell them stories from it. Second stage is where friends ask them, what'd you think of China Boy? And they'd say, oh, it was a great book. Because they, without having actually cracked the pages, well, they cracked the pages, but without actually having read it, they had heard enough of the stories where they thought they had read it. And then third was when schools that they were in adopted the book and made it required reading and for certain classes, out of guilt, they then read it. But it was much later than I would have guessed.
How did your relatives, and particularly your stepmom, feel about how they were cast in the book?
I don't know my stepmother's reaction because she had passed away. I say this as a joke. I have said it as a joke, and I'm going to say it aloud. I'm going to test it right now to see if this is real. The line goes like this: if my stepmother were still alive, I'd still be in the Army and a bachelor. I think it's true. I imagined having a wife. I imagined bringing that wife into reaching distance, punching distance of Edith's range. Her real name was Edith, not Edna. And then my whole body would just grow cold. So I don't think I really would. I think I would have stayed in the Army, and it would have been a very meaningful career for me. I appreciated the military deeply. It was like a continuation of the YMCA. It was about principles and about, taking chances for your buddies. And I honor that. So she never got to read it because by the time she had passed away, that allowed me to court Diane and get married and have children and bring the children into the world without the fear that Edith would do something to them.
Looks like we have time for one more question.
What became of your three sisters?
Well, wonderful things, really. Eleanor, let's see, can I remember my own book? Jennifer. Her real name is Eleanor, Chinese name Awa. Our firstborn, she's an amazingly artistic, elegant person. She lives in New York, with a wonderful husband. Their whole story is summed up in this: when he courted her, he took her to Europe, and they bought a Basendorfer and a Steinway matching grand pianos that they could play together. Ying, my middle sister, was in this very room earlier in the year for literary luminaries. Is it luminaries?
Laureates.
Laureates. I knew that was wrong.
It's a luminary of sorts.
Laureates. I'm sorry. And she and I are probably the closest in terms of relationship. And she lives in Berkeley. She was a very important politician in Berkeley for many years, and worked for Ron Dellums in D.C. And my youngest sister, Mary, Janie, Megan is Ying, and Janie is Mary. Mary's a medical doctor. She was our mother squeezed her cheeks because these are beautiful women, but when she was small and May, cute, our mother said, "Oh, May, don't worry about grades." The rest of us are being punished about grades, but don't worry about grades. You're so cute. Just marry a kind man and have lots of babies. So, of course, Mary is the one with 2 master's degrees, a PhD, and she's a medical doctor.
All right, I think that's...
He's in Davis.
We have one more? Okay, one more question.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm from City College. My name is Alex Wu.
Hi, Alex.
My question is, after you graduated from West Point, why do you want to carry some job with the military and change to why this China Boy book? Thank you.
Sure. Great question, Alex. First of all, I didn't graduate from West Point. I flunked out in electrical engineering at the end of my third year. It turns out to be West Point's not a good place to go if you don't plan on studying. But when you're as immature as I was, you don't figure that out until you're out the door and you go, wait a moment, did you just kick me out because I don't study? So it was a humiliating event, very painful. And I became a drill sergeant and jumped out of airplanes for a while. And then got my commission through ROTC at University of California at Davis, and then went back in the Army. I only got out of the Army. I would have stayed in for a career. I'm sorry? No, I didn't go to Vietnam. I went to Korea twice. At the time, I felt very cheated. Looking back, given the fact that I was such a lousy infantryman because I was blind. If all engagements had occurred in daylight and my glasses never fogged up, I would have done great. But the fact is, I would have, in combat, I would have put my troops at great risk just because I was so visually challenged. So luckily, I didn't go to Vietnam, not so much for me, but for the men that would have been looking to me, and I would have been leadership by the Braille method. So, but I got out because in my last year of active duty, I was gone. They call it temporary duty, TDY. I was away from home and my wife and our newborn child 300 days. And she just said, this is not a marriage. So you have a choice. You can either get out of the Army or you can leave the service. So, well, I have a choice. So I got out. It was the right decision.
How do you sometimes you have to find your American culture, and how do you incorporate your American culture peacefully with your Chinese culture? And huge conflict.
Okay. I think wonderful questions. Thank you. Certainly, my first 5 years with my Chinese mother, my mami, was most formative. After that, most Chinese, because my Chimu, my stepmother, was German-American, spoke no Chinese, cooked no Chinese dishes. In fact, cooked nothing, really. But, which is why I came to love Lola at the YMCA cafeteria so much. But most of my Chinese culture then came from going to school in Chinatown. So after public school, Chinese American kids then go to Chinese school in San Francisco. I went to St. Mary's. I was, again, very dumb because I spoke no Cantonese, only Songhai and some Hanyu Mandarin, which were totally not understood in Chinatown. So I looked stupid in the Panhandle and looked like an idiot in Chinatown. It's like, you look smart, but you are not smart. So I would say that's it, you know, from friends at St. Mary's who had full Chinese families and still had Chinese culture, and I would visit with them, and so that was it. Certainly the food. I mean, Gohua restaurant, 950 Grand Avenue, my other church. But as for melding Chinese and American culture, it is like having, 8 courses banquet. You get to pick what you like best. There are parts of Chinese culture that American culture can't touch. There are parts of American culture that Chinese culture can't touch. So has it been harmonious blending? No. Lots of train wrecks, lots of collisions, lots of grinding discernment. But when I became a father, the choices became very clear about what parts of Chinese culture we would advance and model and what parts of American culture we would model. Thank you. Are we out of time? Maybe afterwards. Afterwards.
That's his next book. The next book is Gus Lee Gets Concrete.
Well, Well, thank you both so much for that rich conversation. I'd like to quickly just tell you a couple of things. I believe you know that Gus will be signing books in the back of the room. We've spent so much time and so enjoyably that it's going to have to be fairly quick because we're going to be whisked out of here at 8 o'clock. So I want to just make sure that folks respect that and kind of get their books in place and move quickly with that. We'd love to hear what people thought about the One City, One Book program and about this evening's program. You can let us know through the One City, One Book section at the library's website, sfpl.org. I want to, again, thank everyone that's been involved. Especially I want to thank Marilyn and Diane. I want to thank the wonderful Marcia Schneider, who makes these things possible at the library, and Rosie, who has done a wonderful job with this. I want to thank everyone that's participated. I want to thank Books Inc. for being such a gracious sponsor and host and serving great dim sum along with Gus's stories. And thank you all for joining in this great civic reading project. And again, Gus and Oscar, thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane.